Hey there, hi there, ho there. This is Katie Adler, and welcome to Live with Katie, a call-in talk show where we get to respond and talk to each other live. Excuse me. And how you can participate in the show is on the web page. You will see instructions for how to call in to Skype. What you do is you would call Skype, and you would enter the Skype word join conference, JOINCONFERENCE, and after that you would put in the key words, the key, code, which I will give you right now, and you can find on that page, as well as the question submission box. And that number that you would put in is 345116 and the pound 345116 and the pound key. Now, I mentioned before the submission box, and this is where you can put in your questions. Now, you don't have to put in your name or city or email. If you want to, that's fine. The other times when we're talking, we may pass the subject or the topic that you had a question about. Well, that's okay. Please feel free to write in your question anyway, or your comment, because we can always go back to it. There's always so much more that can be talked about on any topic. And tonight we have quite a few things to talk about. So let's get started, and I will bring Clark onto the show.
Hello there.
Hi, Clark. How are you?
Good. How are you doing, Katie?
Good. Actually, I went to your blog right before we started, and I started laughing, and I knocked over my microphone as I was doing this. You went to the soccer game the other night.
That's right.
Yeah, and so it sounds like you had a really good time.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. A friend of mine had an extra ticket, and he asked me on Sunday night or Monday. And, initially I was a little hesitant because it's fairly far up north in Saitama. But I ended up going, and it was the best ending of any sporting event I've ever seen. So I was very happy to go.
Now, are you a soccer fan, generally speaking?
I am when I'm not in the United States. It's a lot harder to stay excited about soccer in the U.S. because there's only so many people who enjoy it. But when you spend time in other countries and it's actually on television in the bars, or the average person knows something about it, it's a lot easier to stay excited about.
And what I was laughing about was on your blog you wrote an absolutely electric ending to my first time watching The Samurai Blue. For the rest of my life, I will remember this as the Honda penalty kick, a phrase that will perpetually confuse my future children, as we will most likely own a Honda for unrelated reasons. And I love that. I wondered what it is about a Honda car that you like.
Well, I used to own a Honda. They're very reliable, and they're not very expensive. And I had a good experience with my first one. So currently I don't own a vehicle, but as I probably will return to the U.S. at some point, I assume I'll probably get a Honda.
Now, after having gone to this game the other night, are you inspired to travel to Brazil to go to the World Cup?
I don't think so. I think it's too much of a I like sports, but I think it's very enjoyable just go to a crowded bar where there's a lot of excited fans too. So I think I'll save myself the expense of going to Brazil.
Well, and you're going to find a lot of excitement when that's going on here in Japan. Shibuya that night was just packed with people, singing and clapping and getting themselves to a place or location where they could watch the game.
Yeah, I mean, I was at a qualifier maybe a year ago at a bar in Abyss, and it was absolutely packed. For a fairly unimportant game, they really come out to support the team, which is great to see.
Yes, yeah, I think so too. It's a lot of fun. So I want to congratulate you on living in a place that you love.
Yeah, no, it's thank you.
That's awesome, because I don't know, there aren't many people who really can come out and say, "Oh, I just love where I don't hear people say that."
Well, that's too bad. I mean, I've been a lot of places in the world. I mean, mostly just traveling. I've lived most of my life in the U.S. But just from various travels, it's really hard to beat Japan. I mean, once you get over some of the homesickness, and it can be frustrating not to be able to have meaningful conversations as often as you'd like in your native language. But other than that, for most ways that you would judge quality of life, I think Japan is extremely enjoyable, and especially for a foreigner, because I think one of the complaints that Japanese people sometimes voice about Japan is that it's too closed and there's a lot of peer pressure. But I don't think foreigners feel the same pressure that the Japanese do.
Right.
So I sort of feel like it's almost cheating in a way, because we get to experience all the good things, but not as many of the bad things.
But yeah, that's the beauty of it, though, isn't it? I think for many people, when they live in a foreign, well, I don't know. It would seem, maybe I'm just because from my experience, that is what I have experienced also, and friends have experienced too. Although I must say, I do find at times that men and women, foreign men and women, have different experiences here. And I think one of the differences is that, the men, it doesn't really matter which country they come from, they're used to being, the top dog in their country. And when they come to Japan, that shifts quite a bit for them, and it's sometimes hard for men to adjust to that. But I don't know if you found that at all or not.
No, I mean, but I do hear what you're saying about it being different for men and women. I mean, I think what surprised me, in retrospect, it shouldn't be that surprising, but most of, when I see sort of like what I call, when I say foreigners, I usually mean the ones that are obviously foreign to me, white faces or black faces, or basically Asian looking people, and they're primarily men, at least in Tokyo, and I don't know if that's because of the types of work that brings them here, but I imagine it might be maybe a little more lonely as a woman, but that's just speculation on my part.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I haven't really heard women say too much about being lonely, so that's something that I'll maybe think about for a study. So, how long did it take for you to fall in love with Tokyo?
Well, I think love's a strong word. Like I love I love most things about it. I don't want to say that I've sort of made my final decision and nothing can be better. But I came here maybe 3 years ago for vacation to Japan, and I didn't like Tokyo very much. I was only here for 3 days, partly because it's very hard to feel like you've seen Tokyo in only a few days. I mean, that contrasts sharply to a city like, even New York City, which is enormous. As a tourist, about Central Park, about the Statue of Liberty, about Times Square. and you can go to some of these iconic places in only 3 days or less and feel like, oh, I've seen New York. I have like a feel for it. Whereas Tokyo, at least in the United States, there's very few movies that are set or filmed in Tokyo. And I watch a lot of movies, and I had no idea of what Tokyo looked like. So there's not that feel, like Paris, everyone knows what it looks like, or London or Rome. But so you get to Tokyo for the first time, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm here. So it's not as initially that thrilling. But then when I moved here for work, it didn't take long for me to realize that the entire city is interesting. It's not just pockets. And then throw on top of that, it's very safe. I think that's, to say a city is great because it's safe sounds a little boring. However, what the safety allows you to do is go everywhere without worry, and that really opens it up quite a bit.
Boy, I agree 100%, and it's something that when I explain to people back in the United States about walking home at 11:30 p.m. or midnight or, anything, they just can't believe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's see. I'm going to go back to the soccer topic. I have Kaz from Arlington, Virginia. And the question is, why are North Americans not super enthusiastic about soccer?
I'm answering this?
Yes. Well, I guess because you said that when you're in the when you're outside of the United States, you follow soccer because it's everywhere and it's interesting. But when you go back to the United States, it's not something that you follow.
Yeah, I think it just might be historical precedent. I mean, the National Football League, for example, wasn't very popular until sometime after World War II. It was, college football was much more popular. Boxing used to be, everyone used to know about boxing or horse racing. Other than the Kentucky Derby and the other races in the Triple Crown, I don't think there's much of a consciousness about horse racing in America. So I think things change over time, and I suspect that soccer will continue to grow. But there's a lot of competition. I like American football quite a bit, and I like basketball and I like hockey. So if you only have so many hours in the week, and if we have other alternatives, it's you have to make a choice, I suppose. So, but I think soccer will continue to grow now that it's so much easier with the internet to follow other sports.
Yes, and I think also what's interesting is I know for children up until maybe elementary school or junior high school, I mean, we even have the term soccer moms. Mm-hmm. And these are the mothers who take their children to practice and encourage them. But yeah, once they hit junior high school or probably more high school, for some reason soccer just drops off the map. It did for my brother too. I mean, he was an excellent soccer player, loved it, and he played all up until the time he went to high school, and then it just wasn't really offered, so he opted for baseball and basketball.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Kaz. That was a great question. So I have another question, and this question is from Puchin, and she writes, "Hi, Katie. Hi, Clark. While I was reading Clark's blog, I was wondering what attracts people, especially people from foreign countries, to Tokyo, not Kyoto. I live in Kyoto and know the charm of the city, temples, shrines, traditional Japanese cuisine, etc. But Tokyo, I'd like to know, what do you think about that?"
Do you want to go first, Katie? Or shall I?
Well, I mean, one of the things I think that it's dependent on is work. And Tokyo is the capital of Japan, and that's where a lot of financial businesses, it's where most businesses set up. So, you know, people have to go where the jobs are. And I think Kyoto, there are many foreigners living there, especially in the arts. It attracts a lot of, most of my artist friends live in Kyoto, and they do theater, they do dance, they do, you know, any kind of art medium. That's what they're doing, and they're very much, for me, Kyoto foreigners, and they're different than the foreigners who would come to Tokyo or Osaka. There's a different feel to them. So Kyoto tends to attract more of an artist crowd, or at least it used to. I'm not sure if that's true anymore. But Tokyo really is where the work is, and that's what people gravitate towards.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if I lived in Kyoto, my blog would be about Kyoto. So it's not out of preference for one over the other. But I will say that I've had a number of guests from the U.S., friends and family, and they almost all go down to Kyoto for at least a few nights, and they all love it. And I think especially as a visitor, it's far less overwhelming than Tokyo, and it is quieter and it is more connected to nature. So, yeah, I don't think people necessarily prefer Tokyo more than Kyoto. They're just different, and the size is much different, and the types of things that you do in the two cities is different. And I mean, frankly, if Kyoto were as big as Tokyo, it wouldn't be Kyoto. You know, you wouldn't have the smaller streets and you know, the number of the urban sprawl would ruin Kyoto if it were the same size as Tokyo.
Yes, I agree. Now, did you have a choice, Clark, as to where you could live in Japan, or were you directed to go to Tokyo?
No, it was my contract was with a specific company in Tokyo.
Right. Yeah. That's excellent, though. So how do you find being a salaryman?
It's, you know, I don't think it's much different. I like the word. I think it's a funny word. You know, and especially, you know, when you say it properly in Japanese with the LR sound. But no, it's, if I were Japanese, I don't think it would be much different than my work back in the U.S. You know, I don't speak much Japanese at all, so I'm a little excluded from the normal hustle and bustle of the day. So my experience is quite different than if I were a Japanese salaryman. But the part that I really feel part of things is every once in a while we'll go out for drinks after work to an izakaya, and you know, it's one thing you can't explain to someone from the U.S. or probably most countries, that going to an izakaya after work is not the same as going to, you know, your local pub after work in the U.S. The food's different. The fact that you're sitting down is different. And maybe something about the Japanese language, and even, you know, the formality of saying, you know, someone's last name and then san, you know, instead of using their first name. You know, maybe even something like that makes the whole experience a little different. But I absolutely love the after work izakaya drinking. I think it's spectacular.
Do you think that the way that it's done here in Japan really helps you maintain that idea of business, or are you able to let your hair down and relax, or is it a formal way of letting your hair down and relaxing?
No, I mean, personally, and I can't speak for the others, but I think it's a way of bonding without necessarily having other common interests. I don't have that many conversations at work with my coworkers, but when you're going drinking, you have plenty of things to talk about with the food and the drink right in front of you, or you can talk about trips you've been on, and it really opens up conversation. So I think it's just a way of connecting, more on a personal level with your coworkers than you would otherwise. To me, that's the benefit.
That's great. Now, do you find that the overall atmosphere in the workplace in terms of the economic situation and how business is going overall in your workplace or in other people's workplaces you talk to, do you find that most people are pretty positive about what's happening in the economy?
No, I mean, I think most people are influenced by the general sense of, now things have changed with Abe and Abenomics, and people love to talk about that. But up until then, I think everyone just sort of assumed this sense of, things are sort of slowly declining, and we're kind of upset about it, but what am I going to do about it?
Okay.
Not from what the things that people would say to me, they weren't, despondent, but it was just sort of slightly down in the dumps, I would say.
Right. Well, and you came in 2011, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, after the earthquake.
After the earthquake. Was there any question in your mind about coming or not coming?
No, I was sort of, the position opened up fairly soon after the earthquake, but there were a few months with paperwork and logistics before I would have to come over, and I knew I would have enough time, enough stuff would settle down that I'd be able to, make an informed choice, by the time I had to go. So there was really no issue.
Okay, that's good to know, and it's proved to turn out to be a good choice. It sounds like.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I have a comment from Hiroshi in Kawaguchi, and he writes, I drank a beer at a... What's
Sorry.
that?
I've been to Kawaguchi.
Oh, you have? All right. Yeah. Well, the comment is, I drank a beer at a standing bar with my coworker tonight. It was fun.
Yes, that's. I don't think you can't have a bad time unless you drink way too much. And actually, another point is I find, and maybe it's because I'm a foreigner and people like to practice their English, but bars in Japan are very friendly for people who go in by themselves. I feel more comfortable going into a bar alone in Japan than I do in the U.S. Because and maybe it's because in Japan more people do it, so you don't stick out as much. But if you just, when I sit down at a bar in Japan, I'd say 50% of the time I end up having a pretty decent conversation with, somebody who's sitting near me.
That's excellent, and I think that in general, which is a really surprising thing, is that doing things by yourself in Japan is normal. Going to the theater, going to lunch, going to a coffee shop, going to an expensive restaurant, going to dinner. It's not looked at as weird or uncomfortable, but in the United States, people have an extremely difficult time doing things by themselves.
Yep. No, I'm glad you mentioned that. I love going to the movies by myself because you just get to see whatever you want. And in the States, I would do it, and I had done it enough that it didn't bother me. But when I got to Japan, I noticed that I was definitely not the only one by myself. And so, that's definitely true.
Yes. Well, I have, let's see, we can get to your, Puchin has one more comment. She writes, by the way, I found Nakajin Capsule Tower. Is that Yes, very interesting. I'm a little interested in architecture, so reading your website is really fun for me. May I ask which structure do you like best in Tokyo?
I'd probably have to say and I feel stupid for not knowing the exact name, but it's one of the Olympics stadiums in by Harajuku, between Harajuku and Yoyogi. I think it's the wrestling or basketball arena. I think that's definitely the most beautiful structure, and it's from 1964, and it looks modern today.
And have you actually been inside the structure?
I have not. I actually haven't even thought about trying to get inside, but it's so beautiful on the outside that I sort of have been content with that. But now that you mention it, maybe I'll try to get inside.
Now, architecture. What has fueled your interest in architecture?
Frankly, I don't know. It predates coming to Japan. I've been to, in the U.S., if you like architecture, it's hard to avoid Frank Lloyd Wright. And I've been to a number of his buildings in the U.S. I'm surprised by people who aren't interested in architecture. I think to me, it's the same as types of art. You might have different opinions. Some people might like Impressionists, some people might like, abstract, etc. But I expect that everyone likes art to a certain degree, and if they don't, then that confuses me. And to me, architecture is the same way. I can't imagine not enjoying some architecture. I don't care which type, but I think everyone should have an opinion on what constitutes a good house or structure.
Excellent. And do you have a certain time period that you gravitate towards?
I think that's changed a lot coming to Japan, because there's a lot different types of structures here. So I think I've moved away from singles. I used to be very focused on a particular building, and now I'm more concerned about streets and neighborhoods, because that's one of the things I like the most about Tokyo and Japan, is that you might have a collection of fairly drab buildings, but the street is excellent because there's restaurants or there's a little stream by it. So less focus on structures and more focus on sort of a collection of structures.
Right. Great. Puchin, thank you for your questions. And then Hiroshi writes again, happy you came to our city. I can take you to the standing bar in Akabane. Nikome is 110 yen. Very, very reasonable. You can enjoy there.
That sounds perfect.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for that. I have a question from Chieko. And Chieko writes, hi, Katie. Hi, Clark. Clark, I like your blog because Tokyo is my hometown. How do you choose the theme of your blog post?
That's a good question. If you saw the desktop of my computer, that would start to explain it, is that I have probably 100 ideas right now. And, so I have a Word file with maybe 3 lines, and it might be from 2 years ago, but there might be something next week that relates to it, and I try to piece that together. So I really try to let the theme make itself obvious, and I like to combine 2 themes. I'm a little behind. I have a lot of ideas that I have yet to get onto the blog, but I'd rather have that problem than the other way around.
Yes, yeah. Now, in terms of writing, is writing something that you majored in or focused on in university, or any studies that you did?
No, other than having to write papers in university. No, it's just really sprung out of having moved to Tokyo. that I started the blog and started having a greater interest in writing.
Do you think that living in Tokyo and doing this blog has maybe inspired a book in you?
Yeah, if someone has an offer. I mean, I don't think I wouldn't want to write a book without it knowing it's going to be published. Because I think growing up, well, going back to the earlier question about writing, there's many things that if someone said, hey, do you want to be, a professional baseball player or professional this or that, it sounds cool. And writing a book has always sounded cool. But that doesn't mean I really thought about being, an author or a writer. But the concept of a book is far less interesting now that the internet has made it easier to get your word out to the world through another means.
Right.
I remember I read a book by John McPhee, who's one of the masters of nonfiction writing, and he said that one of his books which was fairly obscure, might sell 600 copies a year. This is maybe 10 or 20 years after it was initially published, but they still kept it in print.
Mm-hmm.
But 600 copies a year, that's the number of people who purchased it, and then the number of people who actually read it, might be a little bit lower than that. And that's a very famous author. The beauty of the internet is you can reach a very wide audience with, virtually no overhead.
That is very true. Now, some of the topics that you have on your blog, the funny Japanese street signs, how did that get started for you?
Well, that started on my first trip to Japan as a vacationer, and I just took a bunch, maybe 2 or 3 shots of funny signs. There's one in Yokohama, the Kirin beer factory. There's a sign it's telling you not to climb the tree, and there's a picture of a boy with a broken arm in front of the tree. And I mean, there's nothing like that in the United States, and I just found it amusing, so I took a picture. And then just when I moved here, from walking around the city, you notice that there's just so many of these signs, and there's very small differences. They might have the exact same message, but they'll draw it in a slightly different way. And the combination of those two things really just made me obsessed with taking a picture of every time I saw one.
So is there something about them that kind of contrasts with what you grew up with? Is there a cultural element to the signs that is noticeable for you, like a difference between the United States and Japan and how we convey information to people?
I don't think, my guess, and I don't know where this came from, but in Japan, the cartoons are very normal. Like they're, adults, men and women read manga. A few weeks ago I was taking a train, and one of the stops goes by a Japanese Defense Force base, and there's a poster of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, but they're like all cartoony and they look like characters from South Park. There is absolutely no chance that the United States Army would have, a picture of the Marines, with, looking like Cartman. But for some reason, it's very normal and accepted to use cartoons to represent serious things in Japan. Mm. And I don't know enough about the cultural history of Japan to know why that is the way it is. Mm. But it is, and as a result, in the U.S., our signs are very, very spare and cerebral, and they're not very fun. But in Japan, the signs are really, really funny. I got one recently of an old woman riding a bicycle and someone's like grabbing her purse, and just like the look of terror on her face is just priceless.
Mm. Well, maybe it's that pictures convey 1,000 words. I don't know, but I absolutely agree with you. The military in the United States takes itself very seriously and wouldn't have a cartoon depiction of who they are. That's interesting. So I want to jump, just because we had talked a little bit about the standing beer bar and the izakayas. I want to go back because on your blog, and Chieko, thank you so much for the question. Sorry about that. Thank you. You talked about beer, beer crafting. Is that what it's called?
Craft beer.
Craft beer, yes.
Yeah.
And is this one of your hobbies? Is beer making something that you do, or is it beer tasting?
Yeah, it's the beer drinking. I feel like we're talking a lot about drinking, and well, maybe that's accurate as far as my life goes. But no, back in the U.S., I found one of the best ways to see a new place is to go to the local brewery and just do a brewery tour, or go to a local craft beer bar, because I think so many people in the U.S. drink craft beer now that I don't think there's necessarily such thing as a craft beer person and a non-craft beer person. But I think what I'm trying to get at is, if you're willing to spend a little more money on a better or more interesting beer, you're going to be drinking it not to get drunk, and more for, the enjoyment of it. And so I've always enjoyed going to craft breweries in the U.S. And so when I got to Japan, I thought, hey, let's continue that trend. And it's been quite good way to meet people. Going back to what I said about meeting people in bars, when you go to a craft beer bar in Japan, I think you're more likely to get someone who speaks pretty good English, because maybe they've been to Europe or maybe they've been to the U.S. and they want to talk about the beer with somebody.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I highly agree with you. The art of a good wine, making a good wine, a good beer, a whiskey, it's very, very pleasurable. So yeah, no judgment here. I guess we are talking about alcohol a lot. I don't know why. Sorry about that. But yeah, I really enjoy summertime, and that's the time that I'll have maybe a beer or two on the weekend. And with the humidity and with the all the different special flavors that there are, it's a very enjoyable experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the Tokyo area, is there an area that holds more appeal for you than other areas? Is there an area that you really, really enjoy more than another area?
There's not one in particular. I mean, I have this map, this atlas of Tokyo, and I've made a conscious effort of trying to see as many areas as possible. I'd say one of the areas that I've returned to several times is the Tamagawa River area between Tokyo and Kawasaki. I particularly like Futako Tamagawa. There's a area along the river where just hundreds of people on a sunny day will just sit there. And I've probably been there maybe 6 times, and I'll bring my friends there when they're visiting Japan to show them the variety that you have in Tokyo, that it's not all Shibuya, and it's not all Ginza.
And when you're a student of history, and when you go to Japan, or being in Japan, was Japanese history something that you studied, or was it a different history that you studied?
No, I mean, as far as history of Japan goes, I didn't know much. I mean, I knew about the Meiji Restoration and the Tokugawa shogunate and a little bit of the pre-World War II time period and a little bit of the Reconstruction after the war. But we don't delve into too much of that in American history classes or world history classes in the United States. Unless you specialize in Japanese history, I don't think the average person who goes to college really gets that much Japanese history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's probably true. And when we do get it, it's always connected to World War II.
Yeah, and the bomb.
Yeah, it's a very microscopic image and idea that we get about the Japanese and the Japanese people, right, and the Japanese history. And I guess that kind of takes me on to describing different areas of Japan. There was something you wrote about Roppongi as a foreign ghetto. Do you think because that Roppongi has a historical connection to World War II? Excuse me. I mean, that's where a lot of the soldiers and everyone spent their off-duty time.
Right.
What do you think about that area? A foreign ghetto. That's an interesting description.
Well, I think it's a necessary evil. No, I go to Roppongi quite a bit just because you tend to do that if you know English-speaking people, either Japanese or foreign. There are a lot of restaurants, and it is centrally located to a lot of things. And I sometimes work in that area as well. So when I say foreign ghetto, I mean ghetto in the way of it being a concentration of people, not in it being really a bad place. But I try to not go there on purpose because I end up going there not on purpose so often, because you sort of get drawn into it as a foreigner, or at least I do sometimes. So no, if I choose, I'll go anywhere else other than Roppongi in order to have a more local experience of Tokyo.
Right. Now, in your blog, is this something that you keep updating, that you have a certain schedule that you keep to with it?
No, I try to post at least 2 or 3 times a month. However, the longer pieces take a lot of time, and I've been kind of slacking on putting some of those out. So no, it's more, if I look at the counter where it shows like how many posts this month, and if it's getting towards the end of a month and I haven't posted anything, then I really try to crank at least one out. But no, there's no set schedule, and part of that is because work is fluid as far as how busy it is, or socially I might be more busy at sometimes than other times. So it's hard to have a steady schedule with this.
I think it's quite impressive, all of the different topics and ideas that you've chosen to write about. Is there one blog post or a couple of blog posts that stand out a bit for you, that you really found something that captivated you or motivated you or inspired you?
Yeah, so I think I've tried to do that with, if you go to the main homepage, there's maybe 10 or 12 sort of featured entries, and those are the ones I sort of, if someone randomly picks an entry to read, I'd want them to pick one of those. The one about it starts off with Ghosts of Showa, the Karasuyama apartment complex. I think that's the one maybe I'm the most proud about, because it's the closest to journalism, in my opinion. There's very little about this topic in English anywhere else on the internet. And so if you Google gated communities in Tokyo, it's maybe the second hit. And last week, I think it was, there's a professor at Waseda University in like the urban planning department or something like that, and he posted a link to my blog entry and said, check this out, to his followers. And that made me feel validated that what I'm doing is not complete BS. Also the one at the bottom of the first page, which is called "Not Like a Cancer Grows: Artistic Expression as Alternative Success Narrative." It's sort of a bit of a mouthful, but the point of that was, this was my first few months in Japan, and going back to what you were saying about the economic climate, I was hearing people, both Japanese and foreign, bemoan, Japan's sluggish economy, and it really sort of made me annoyed, because people worldwide, it's not just an American thing, it's not just but I know America the most, that people define success, a lot of them as material success and making a ton of money. And I certainly understand the value of money and the value of material wealth, but it can't be an end in and of itself. And especially in Japan, where you have a country that per capita, the GDP is extremely high, the standard of living is extremely high. For people to be depressed and feel sad and think that Japan's a bad place is absolutely absurd. And so what I really sort of hope I can sort of highlight is a lot of the problems that people have in Japan, or really anywhere, is sort of all in your head. If you want to be happy about your circumstances, you can just change that. Whereas if you are in a country where you don't have access to clean water, you don't have access to food, you have to worry about personal safety on a daily basis, that's not something you can change just by changing your mindset. So some of my entries, and I think the one I mentioned first, I really tried to talk about that one. Also, the one right above it, "My heroes have always been petroleum cowboys," also talks about that within the context of the limits of growth as it relates to our dependence on petroleum.
Right. Have you shopped your stories around?
No, I mean, one, because I have no idea to whom I would shop it, and two, right now it's just for my own enjoyment. And if I start thinking about it in a careerist way, I'm a little afraid it will take my joy, the joy of doing it away. But I would definitely, I'm basically open to anything in life, and so that's something I am open to, but I have not pursued any of that.
Now, is a blog something that you've always done, or was it moving to Tokyo that inspired you to create a blog?
Moving to Tokyo. My first entry was, I think, my third day in Tokyo.
That's pretty quick.
Yeah, I don't even know. I can't even remember the. Actually, it's about apartment. I mean, it's on the blog, but I don't know why I pushed myself to do this, but I wrote about apartment hunting, and I'd be interested to walk through, my line of thinking, because I had always sort of made fun of blogs, at least in my head. I thought they were for when blogs were first quote unquote invented, my impression was it was sort of over emotional teenagers in their bedroom, writing about how awful life was. So it took a while for me to get over that impression.
Oh, it's funny how our biases are created, and yet on the other end of the spectrum, at that same time that over emotional teenagers were creating blogs, there were people creating huge businesses from blogging.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting. So it sounds kind of like you have a travel bug. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a travel bug, but it's a lot different than maybe it used to be. I think a lot of people, when they want to see like the big sites, right, like the pyramids or the Great Wall of China, or Machu Picchu. I think the more I've traveled, the less interested I am in like the sites, and it's not just to be different. I mean, although I think sometimes I can be accused of that rightly, but I think it's more that places where a lot of tourists go are generally unpleasant, because you have, especially if it's in a developing country, you have an economy built around trying to pull as much money out of the tourists' pockets. And the more the tourists arrive, the more it changes what they're going there to see. And that's why I love Japan, because it's a completely developed country, yet it's also very interesting. And so people coming to Japan will not really change Japan. I mean, it would take an enormous number of people to come to Tokyo to change the complexion of Tokyo. And that's what attracts me to Japan, and that's why when I go traveling, I generally like to go to big cities, because only even if you have a touristy part of a big city, it can only be so large. The rest of the city is going to be local, and that's what I enjoy the most when I'm traveling.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting observation, and I think one of the things that has always interested me about Japan was how on the surface they change so readily and so easily to keep up with modern times, but actually in practice and in daily life, it's so firmly rooted in tradition that it has a very strong anchor, I think, as it goes into the future, and maybe that's why things change. Some things will change really quickly, but most things, I think, change pretty slowly here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, which actually suits me. Okay. That's okay with me.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one as well.
So your family, it sounds like you've had a lot of family and friends come to visit you. Do they all have travel? Is that something that runs in your family? Love of history, photography, culture, having a travel bug?
I think the easiest way to describe it is just love of learning. And so whether it's traveling or any other thing, when we went on vacation as a family when I was younger, we would go to all these Civil War battle sites, or like presidents' homes, like where they would go after they were president. There's 100 of them in Virginia, because that's where all the first presidents were from. And as a child, I was bored stiff maybe half the time, but then the other half the time I found it fairly interesting. And I think a lot of my interests now probably stem from what my parents exposed me to.
Is there a place in Japan that that's on your map that you're interested in going to?
sadly, there's nothing. Someone asked me recently, very similar question. There's not one place where I said, "Oh, I need to go there." I would say though, I probably want to get to what I call the west coast of Honshu, the Japan seaside by, I think Kanazawa would be one of the cities over there. I've never been on that side. So more, and it's not because there's anything particularly interesting that I know of. It's more just geographically, I want to expand what I've seen.
Right. Yeah. So, what are your future plans? What's your big vision for yourself and your future and where you're headed?
I don't like making predictions, but sort of what I was sort of getting at earlier when you asked about, whether I've been shopping any of the stories around, I just want to keep writing for my enjoyment and for the enjoyment of whoever happens to enjoy reading it. And if something comes of it, that's great. And if something, from a monetary perspective, because I feel like something has already come out of it personally, that I don't necessarily need the validation of selling it. I have a job that I enjoy. If someone, if God came down from the heavens and said, you can write for the rest of your life and you're going to be quite comfortable, I would take that. But I think part of what I enjoy about where I am now is I have the freedom to write about whatever I want because I don't have to worry about selling it. And, having artistic freedom, I don't really think of myself as an artist, but more just sort of having the intellectual or thought freedom to explore whatever path I want to is very valuable for me at this point.
Right, and I would just like to remind everyone that the website is thetokyofiles.com, TheTokyoFiles.com, and that link is on my website. But what you should probably do is bookmark the page because there are some very interesting stories there. And there's hiking. Are you a hiker also?
Yeah, I mean, not too. A lot of what the blog started out as was a sort of a reference book for myself, because one of the things I think you emailed me about earlier was the museum maps. I found it's very hard to find things in Japan because if you Google it in English, you might not find anything, or it might be on the 17th page. And there were a number of fairly well-known museums that I went into Google Maps, which I used all the time in the U.S. I'd go into Google Maps, I'd type the name of the museum, and nothing would show up, or it would be a completely different museum. And so, so for the hiking was similar. I wanted to go hiking, and there's some really excellent blogs about hiking. I think Hiking in Japan is one of them. But I wanted specifically day hikes in the Tokyo area, and there wasn't a very easy way to find it, so I decided I would just, make my own page.
Nice. And the museums, are you able to find time to get to the museums and enjoy them?
I haven't gone to as many over the last several months, partly because I now have more, friends outside of work. My first 6 months in Tokyo, I think every weekend I would go to at least one museum. And it's a good way to see new neighborhoods because it gives you a focus. So now I probably have slowed down quite a bit on the museums.
Yeah, no, it's different phases in a person's life that take you to different interests and ideas, and you can always go back to them. But the information is there on the TokyoFiles.com page. Oh, I have one more comment here from Hiroshi, and he writes, Ghetto, what's that? Oh, Hiroshi, that is Ghetto. Ghetto. And he continues with, Roppongi is a small world. We can see gaijin like you, Y-O-U, here and there. When I was a college student, I rarely saw them. It has changed.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, now it's, Tokyo is very Japanese, right? Like outside of Roppongi and outside of a few other touristy areas, you don't see that many foreigners. But Roppongi is one of the areas where you're constantly seeing people who are obviously not Japanese.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I can't imagine Roppongi without foreigners. That's an interesting concept for me.
Right.
Clark, I want to thank you so much for being on the show tonight and for your patience with my scheduling mishaps and mistakes. I really appreciate your patience with me.
Oh no, thanks. I mean, this has been a blast. I'm glad you had me. And I didn't say thank you. I didn't say thank you to all the people who wrote in with their questions, but those were great questions.
Yeah. It was Chieko, Puchin, Hiroshi, and Kaz. Kaz was writing from West Virginia, which I think that's where it was West Virginia. So yes, thank you everyone for those questions. And Clark, thank you so much again, and the best of luck to you with everything.
Thank you very much. You too.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.